Welcome to the Stories for Sleep channel. Don't forget to subscribe and like right away, because by the end of the lecture, you'll be fast asleep. Close your eyes, the story is about to begin. Great civilizations give birth to great myths. They reflect a people's understanding of the world, the order of life, and death. But while in most mythologies the gods are like humans, in China, they are completely different. Here, the universe is structured like a vast empire where even immortals are subject to laws. At the top is the Jade Emperor, not an all-powerful creator, but the administrator of the cosmos. Beneath him is a divine bureaucracy, ministers responsible for the elements, judges who monitor the karma of mortals, and countless officials who record people's deeds and decide their fate in the afterlife. Everything in this world is based on laws, rituals, and order. Even after death, a person does not disappear but passes through the 10 courts of hell, where their life is examined from scrolls and a verdict is passed. Only after this do they proceed to a new reincarnation. Everything is clear, systematic, and subject to rules. But if there are rules, there will always be someone to break them. An unexpected guest once appeared in the celestial palace, a monkey born from a stone. He was not like the others. Instead of a mortal's place, he aspired to more. He mastered magical arts, became proficient in combat techniques, stole the peaches of immortality from the heavens, and declared that from now on, he was equal to the emperor himself. Armies were sent against him, sages were summoned, and they tried to subdue him by force, but no one could defeat him. In other myths, heroes do not fight the gods but change the very nature of the world. When a terrible flood inundated China, people cried out for help, but the celestial beings did not intervene. Then one man, Hou Yi the Great, decided to act. He did not try to stop the element, he did not rush into battle with the water. He changed the rivers themselves, dug canals, and directed the flows into the right channels. The flood receded, and people could live on. Not war, but reason, knowledge, and labor became their salvation. Such stories are still alive today. They can be seen in Chinese architecture, in festivals, in martial arts. Even the structure of the state itself, where order and discipline are paramount, resembles the celestial empire, where everything is subject to the law. But before we talk about gods, heroes, battles, and myths, we need to understand this world. For once, there was no heaven, no earth, not even the emperor himself. There was only the void, a formless chaos. And one day, a giant was born from it. When time itself had not yet begun, chaos reigned in the universe. It was everywhere, having neither form nor boundary. The elements merged, appeared, and vanished, flowing like an elusive mist. But within this chaos, hidden in its very depths, a new order was conceived. At its heart was a cosmic egg filled with the pure energy of Yin and Yang, light and darkness. There, in that confined space, slept the giant Pangu. He knew neither his destiny nor even that the world around him did not yet exist. For him, there was no time, because time had not yet begun. Thousands and thousands of years passed until one day, Pangu opened his eyes. The first thing he saw was darkness. It surrounded him, pressed in on him, filling every cell of his body. The world around him was cramped, closed, compressed into a single hole. He tried to move, but the space gave him no freedom. Then he knew, that he could change this world. He reached out and felt the edge of the shell. It was as strong as stone, but within himself, he felt fury and determination. He took up an axe, born of his own will, and struck with all his might. A crack echoed through the void. The world around him began to vibrate. Fissures ran across the egg. With each new blow, its walls cracked more and more. Finally, the shell shattered, its pieces flying in all directions. The light, pure elements soared upwards, thus the sky was born. Everything heavy, dense, and clumsy sank down, forming the earth. But when the shell disappeared, Pangu saw that the world was not yet ready. Everything was unstable, fragile, like a morning mist. The sky barely held its position, threatening to fall again and merge with the earth, mixing everything back into primordial chaos. Then he understood, if he did not hold them apart, the world would disappear. He straightened up to his full height, placed his feet on the earth, and stubbornly propped his hands against the sky to keep it from collapsing. Every day he grew, with every moment he became taller and stronger, and the universe grew with him. A void formed between the earth and the sky, a space where life could be born. He stood like that, holding the world on his shoulders. Everything that existed depended on him. His breath became the wind, his voice the thunder. His movements determined the course of time. Day after day, night after night, he stood, watching the world strengthen and gain power. When he finally felt that the sky would no longer fall, that the earth was firm enough, and that order was established, he closed his eyes and collapsed. His body could no longer hold the world, but it no longer needed to. The universe could exist without him. His last breath swept across the world as a gusty wind, his voice sounded one last time in the peals of thunder. When he fell, his body became part of what he had created. His flesh turned into the earth, his blood into the great rivers, his hair became the forests, and his bones formed the mountain ranges. Even his sweat, falling in drops, gave life to the first rains. But what happened to his soul? Some say it spread throughout the world, filling it with power. Some say his last breath gave rise to the first gods, who continued his work. Others believe that from his spirit, the first human appeared, the one destined to populate this new land. Thus ended the journey of the giant who created the world. The myth of Pangu is a story that everything great requires sacrifice. The world is not born without labor, any creation demands effort. The great order of the world did not arise on its own, it was built, maintained, and protected. But Pangu had only laid the foundation. Heaven and earth were separated, but they were still empty. The world was vast, but there was no life in it. Its history had not yet begun. When Pangu fell, his body became the world, but the universe was not yet complete. Mountains, rivers, forests, and clouds already existed, but their movement was chaotic. Water flowed without purpose, the wind rushed across the plains, not knowing when to stop. The world existed, but it lacked a law that would guide its flow, give it rhythm, and make it alive. Thus appeared Yin and Yang. These were the forces that permeated every part of reality, connecting all that exists. Yang was light, fire, the sun, and movement. It rose upwards, warmed, and brought strength and growth. Yin was darkness, moisture, the moon, and rest. It flowed downwards, cooled, and brought peace. They were not enemies, they complemented each other. Where Yang ignited a flame, Yin brought water to keep it from getting out of control. Where Yang moved the wind, Yin turned it into rain, filling the rivers. Yang created thunder, and Yin, the silence that followed. One could not exist without the other, because light cannot be without shadow, and movement has no meaning without rest. But the world was not divided into two halves, it was woven from the interplay of these forces. If Yang were pure and perfect, it would burn all living things. If Yin became absolute, the world would freeze, plunged into eternal rest. In every ray of sunlight, there is a corner of shadow, in every night, there is a glimmer of light. Everything flows, changes, transforms one into another. Thus appear day and night, summer and winter, life and death. Everything that is born must one day disappear. But from disappearance, something new will arise again. The people living in this world did not just observe this law, they learned to live by it. They understood that if a river flows too violently, it will wash away its banks, and if it stands still, it will turn into a swamp. They saw that a person who only works without rest will burn out, and one who lives in constant repose will wither. They understood that rigidity and flexibility must be in balance, that the world moves not linearly, but in a cycle. Therefore, Yin and Yang became the very essence of the cosmos. They were present in the rhythm of human life, in the changing of the seasons, in the breath of nature. They were the law that no one issued, but to which everything was subject. Among those who appeared after the death of Pangu was Hou Yi. It is said she was born with the first streams when the world first found its balance. Her body was unusual. From the waist up, she looked like a beautiful woman, but below her waist began a long, serpentine tail covered in scales, as flexible and fluid as the current of rivers. She could move across the land, glide through the water, and ascend to the clouds without feeling any barriers. Hou Yi was a creator goddess, but not a ruler. Unlike the Jade Emperor, who governed the heavens, she did not care for power. Her purpose was different. She wanted to create those who would live in this world, feel it, understand it, and fill it with meaning. She wandered the earth for a long time, studying the forests and mountains, peering into the depths of the rivers, trying to understand what life should be. She saw clouds floating across the sky, rivers finding their way to the sea, and fire dancing in the wind. All of this was beautiful, but empty. Everything followed its own path, without will or reason. And then she decided to create a being that could be a part of the world, but at the same time, could change it. She stopped on the bank of one of the great rivers, bent down, and dipped her hands into the soft, pliable clay. Her fingers moved confidently, with love and care, as if she were handling something fragile and precious. She sculpted the first human, a small creature resembling herself, but with 2 legs instead of a tail, and with slender arms capable of creation. She breathed on it, and it stirred. At first, it looked frightened, but then it stood up, looked around, and took a step, then another. It saw the sky, heard the sound of the water, felt the warm air on its skin, and smiled. Hou Yi felt joy. She realized she had made something beautiful and wanted there to be more. She sculpted one after another, and soon, new people appeared next to the first. They held hands, laughed, and looked at the world with wonder. Hou Yi watched them, but she understood that she couldn't spend her entire life sculpting each one by hand, otherwise, the creation of the world would take an eternity. So she devised a new method. She took a rope, dipped it into the liquid clay, and began to swing it through the air. Drops of mud flew in all directions, falling to the ground, and each one turned into a human. The world quickly filled with life. The voices of people filled the plains and hills, the banks of rivers, and the foothills of mountains. But soon she noticed that not all people were the same. Those she had sculpted by hand were strong and well thought out. They were noble, distinguished, and wise. And those who appeared from the drops of clay were crude and imperfect. They were common people, artisans, peasants, and servants. Thus, social inequality appeared in the world. The noble were born from the goddess's hands, while common people arose from a random spattering. But Hou Yi loved all her children. She made no distinction between them. She taught them to live in harmony. The strong were to rule, the wise were to teach. But everyone was important and was a part of the world. However, her story did not end there. When the world was already filled with life, the sky once cracked. The great pillars that held it up fractured, and dark storms began to crash down upon the earth. Fires engulfed the forests, rivers overflowed their banks, and fiery stones fell from the heavens, destroying everything around. The people she had created screamed in fear, hiding, but there was no escape anywhere. Then Nuwa understood, if she did not fix this world, it would plunge back into chaos. She went to the great tortoise, asked for its legs, and propped up the sky so it would no longer fall. She collected multicolored stones, melted them in a great fire, and patched the cracks in the sky. Having given all her strength, Nuwa felt that her time on this earth had come to an end. She knew she could no longer walk among people, watch the sunrises, and listen to the laughter of those she had created. But she no longer needed to fear for them. She watched as people rebuilt their homes, raised their children, passed down knowledge, and created their own future. The world now lived its own life. It is said that upon dying, Nuwa dissolved into the world she had created. Her spirit remained in the stones and clay, in the wind and water, in the breath of every human being. She did not disappear but became a part of all her children. Since then, the Chinese believe that every person carries a particle of divine power, that everyone has a destiny to leave their mark. But the world continued to live on its own. The gods born with the universe wandered among the mountains and rivers, but there was no ruler, no court, no law among them. The world was ungovernable. Then came the one who was destined to take the throne among the celestial beings, the Jade Emperor. But unlike the gods who had existed from the beginning, his role was different. He came when the universe already existed and brought to it what it lacked, order. But the path to power was not easy. It is said that he was once a mortal. He was one who strove for perfection, studied the art of governance, comprehended the wisdom of heaven and earth, and sought harmony in every movement. For hundreds of years, he cultivated his spirit. He grew wiser but did not age. His will, his spirit, and his mind grew stronger until one day he crossed the line that separates a human from an immortal. Then he rose above the mortal world and above the heavens themselves. He came to a place where there was no authority, but where it was needed. And when turmoil began among the gods, when storms threatened to destroy the heavens, he was the one who could stop the chaos. He ascended the throne of the celestial palace through his own righteousness and wisdom, and from that moment, the world changed. Now, every god had their own place. Those responsible for water were given control of rivers, and those who managed the winds were no longer restless wanderers, now their summons was needed. The gods of thunder, rain, the sun, and the moon knew when their hour would come. Even the underworlds were no longer in disarray. Now, the souls of the dead were judged not by the whims of spirits but by strict laws. Thus, eternal order was established. But the Jade Emperor wasn't a god who descended to people or one who interfered in their fates. He sat on his throne, surrounded by celestial officials, observing the universe, issuing decrees, and presiding over judgment among the gods. Over the centuries of his reign, he had repeatedly faced those who dared to challenge him. Great spirits rose against him, trying to overthrow him, and demons attempted to break into the celestial palace. But despite the rebellions and uprisings, he remained on his throne. Human dynasties came and went, the rulers of the mortal realms appeared and vanished, but in the heavens, no one could take his place. The celestial bureaucracy classical building. However, his authority extended beyond the gods. Down below, in the rivers, forests, and mountains, other forces existed, spirits who weren't gods but could still change the fates of mortals, and not all of them were benevolent. The Jade Emperor ruled the heavens, but even his power couldn't encompass everything at once. The universe was too vast, its laws too complex, and its events too numerous. He couldn't personally control the reins and oversee the fates of mortals. Like any emperor in the human world, he needed officials, ministers, and judges to manage the affairs of the celestial palace. Thus, the divine bureaucracy was born, a structure of power that permeated all existence, from the highest celestial halls to the mortal world and even the depths of the afterlife. Each god had their post, and each official was responsible for their part of creation. If rain fell too early or too late, if a ship was caught in a storm, or if a person suddenly died in a freak accident, it wasn't a matter of chance but a decision of the celestial palace. When a thunderstorm began in the world, it wasn't just a play of the elements, it was a decree sent down from the heavens, the execution of a decision made by the gods who controlled the elements. Lei Gong, the god of thunder, led the storm. He was no deity of mercy, his task was to punish. His hands held a hammer with which he struck a drum, summoning thunderclaps. It said that he held a long list of criminals, and when he found those who had committed evil, he would strike them with his hammer. Yushur, the master of rain, controlled when it rained and when it should become dry or be flooded. If a harvest failed due to drought or if fields were ravaged by downpours, it meant the divine department had made its choice. The wind was under the jurisdiction of Feng Bo, the god of air currents. If a storm raged at sea and trees were broken by gusts of wind, it wasn't by chance. It was his decision. But even they were only part of a vast system, for besides the elements, there were more subtle matters like life and destiny, which were handled by entirely different officials. The heavens decided not only when it would rain or thunder but also the fate of every mortal, what life path they were destined to have, whether they would be successful or miserable. This was the responsibility of the Department of Destiny, which was headed by Siming, the celestial scribe. He kept the scrolls of life and death, inscribing the names of everyone born and everyone who died. When a child came into the world, their destiny was already recorded, their successes and failures already predetermined. He had assistants, the 3 star gods of happiness, longevity, and wealth, who could change a person's fate, but only if they deserved it through their actions. Others kept the Book of Rebirth, which recorded the soul's next incarnation. But the most feared was the department that watched over those who violated the laws of the universe, those for whom an afterlife judgment was prepared. If a person escaped punishment in the world of the living, it surely awaited them there. The Jade Emperor didn't personally delve into every case, he created a system, and it worked flawlessly. Nothing happened by chance but according to pre-written scrolls. A person might live with the illusion of freedom, but their life was already inscribed in the celestial archives, and what happened to them was merely the execution of a long-made decision. Earthly protectors and spirits globe showing Europe, Africa. The celestial palace ruled the universe, but people rarely looked up to the distant emperor. The great gods sat on their thrones, giving orders and recording destinies, but their will concerned the general order, not the life of every single person. People sought protectors, patrons, and those who heard their voices, who knew their worries and could help, not in the abstract sense of cosmic order but in concrete, earthly matters. Such beings became gods who were once mortal, whose valor and strength made them more than just humans. They lived among mortals and knew what it meant to fight for truth and achieve their goals. People turned to them for advice. They were put on par with ancient forces because they were living figures who could change a person's fate. The name Hou Yi was known to everyone who had ever heard stories of duty and an unbreakable spirit. He was a general, a man whose fame preceded him. When his life ended, the heavens could not let him go. People like him don't just disappear or become nameless shadows in the cycle of rebirth. He remained to continue being a shield for those who fought for justice. He became the god of war, where strength belongs to those who defend the truth. His image hung in judges' homes, merchants' shops, and military halls. It was impossible to violate his presence. He was invoked in moments when more than just skill with a weapon was needed, when one had to stand to the end, even if all the power of the world was against you. But not everyone was a warrior. People sought not battles but prosperity. They built markets, opened shops, and sought good fortune in a world where hard work didn't always bring results and wealth could come or go. There was a belief that luck was a force that could be attracted if you knew how. Caishen, the god of wealth, was the one who could bestow the favor of fortune. He wasn't asked for wealth out of greed, he was revered by those who knew that labor was the foundation of everything, but even the most skilled master could go unrewarded if the stars didn't align at the right moment. His symbols were hung to make the year a good one, and his statues stood in shops because even the shrewdest merchants knew that without his blessing, a deal could fail. Asking for his help meant acknowledging that the world is moved not only by effort but also by the favor of higher powers. People came to him with gifts, for only those who knew how to share could receive. But even wealth meant nothing if there was no order in the world. You could be brave or lucky, but if the land you lived on was steeped in injustice, if evil went unpunished, and truth could be bought, then neither strength nor gold had any meaning in such a world. Every city needed someone to protect it from injustice. Qing Huang, the city god, didn't have a grand title like the heavenly lords, but his power was felt on every street. His spirit lived in the walls of cities. He was an invisible observer and knew what happened in the back alleys. He saw everything people tried to hide. He didn't allow crimes to go without consequence. Those who hoped to deceive justice feared him more than earthly judges, because human law could be circumvented. No one could hide from Qing Huang. Those who hid from punishment found their end without knowing how their secret was revealed. They were living forces with whom people felt a daily connection. They didn't demand worship, but respect for them was stronger than the fear of the distant heavenly beings because their will could change a mortal's life right here and now. The underworld and its mysteries ghost. But alongside those who protected and granted fortune, others lived in the rustle behind one's back and in the careless words better left unsaid. These were beings who belonged neither to people nor to gods. They were feared, bargained with, and appeased. They were an eternal reminder that death isn't always the end. A person's life could follow its course, striving for prosperity or sinking into vice, but one day, their journey would end. The body would grow cold and still, and it seemed as though everything had been cut short forever. But if for the living, death meant farewell, for the soul, it became the start of a new path. When that moment came, no one met it with comfort. Gates opened before the soul, behind which the realm of Yin and Yang, the king of hell, began. There was no sun, but an ashen sky stretched over the endless plains, veiled in a haze through which a faint, deathly light barely shone. There was no wind, but the silence was filled with the whispers of other destinies, the voices of those who had already passed judgment and were now waiting for their new birth. In the middle of this realm rose a black palace, to which bridges of stone led. Spirits, pale and faceless, stood on either side of the road. Their thin figures cast no shadows. They pointed the souls forward, toward the one who ruled this world. Beyond the enormous gates of the palace, the hall of judgment began. In its depth, Yin and Yang, the lord of the afterlife, was seated on a massive throne, as if carved from the night itself, adorned with carved patterns resembling tongues of fire. His face resembled a stone mask, immobile, devoid of emotion. His eyes glowed from within with a faint yellow light, like the reflection of a candle in an old bronze mirror. He didn't speak unnecessary words or ask questions because the answers were already before him. In his hands, he held the scroll of destinies, unfurled and covered with endless lines in which every life, every thought, and every action was recorded. But he himself did not decide the soul's fate. He was subordinate to 10 judges, each of whom ruled in their own palace deep within the afterlife. A soul began its journey in the first hall, where its past was revealed before it without embellishment. A person might forget what they did in life, might not think about their actions, or might justify themselves to others, but here they saw everything as if reliving every choice. One judge looked at how pure their thoughts were, another at the intentions behind their actions. A third saw how they treated others, who suffered because of them, and who received help. A fourth evaluated how much pain they brought into the world, even if they were unaware of it. And there was no possibility of lying, turning away, or running. With each new step, a person's life became clearer, like a pattern being formed from scattered lines. Some souls passed through these halls without delay. The judges said nothing, only watched them, allowing them to continue. The path led the soul to the Wheel of Rebirth, which spun in the center of Yin Wang's palace. It resembled a huge disc carved from light-colored stone, marked with ancient symbols whose lines glowed with a soft, bluish light. Inside it, endless reflections shimmered. In its depths flowed rivers of time, and the faces of those who had once lived and those who were yet to be born swirled. The wheel moved silently, its rotation never stopped for a moment. It didn't remember names but stored the karma of happiness. If a path was chosen with good, the new body was a blessed home, and life a wonderful gift. If the path was chosen with evil, the new body became a prison, and life a heavy trial. The wheel led everyone to where their own choices led them. But not everyone reached this place. There were those whose lives left too much destruction behind, and their journey stopped among the underground halls. Their karma was too heavy, and they couldn't just leave. The judges sent them to atonement, where they had to pass through the pain they themselves had created. A person who had destroyed other people's lives now saw their own crumble. The one who caused suffering now experienced it themselves. The one who knew no mercy learned what it meant to stand before those they had wronged. This was not punishment but a reflection of their own path as it truly was, but now through someone else's eyes. When everything was finished, the door opened again, and the Wheel of Rebirth accepted the soul. Its light enveloped it, and in an instant, it disappeared into a new world. A person might forget everything that was before, but their karma remained with them. It affected their future path, their encounter with the world, and the trials that awaited them. Life might erase memory, but the universe forgot nothing. The world of the dead didn't always let go of those who left their bodies. There were souls who passed judgment, accepted their fate, dissolved into the Wheel of Rebirth, and moved on. But it also happened that the transition was interrupted, something forced the soul to stay, to cling to a world where it no longer belonged. This is how Hou Yi appeared, the restless ghosts who couldn't find their way forward. Some remained harmless, they returned home, shrouding people in a cold draft on a sealed window or in a premonition that made the heart stand still. Some believed that the Hou Yi were begging, that they didn't want to disappear without a trace, and that if an offering was left at their door, they would leave in peace. Others said that souls who were forgotten began to grow angry, that if no one remembered the deceased, they would turn into a hungry shadow that no longer understood why it was here. But there were also those who didn't want to say goodbye to life. They were held by hatred, revenge, or rage. They didn't seek understanding or wait to be noticed. They wanted those who had condemned them to death to suffer as they once did. They could be felt in misfortunes that came without reason, in disturbing dreams, and in reflections where something was not right. Their victims fell ill, lost their luck, and went mad because they couldn't understand what was happening to them. People left a fire by their doors to prevent a Hou Yi from entering, hung red amulets, and burned incense. But if a spirit had already chosen its victim, it was difficult to get rid of it. Sometimes, it meant that someone had to die. But even the most dangerous Hou Yi were still human souls. They remembered who they were, what they lost, and what they lacked to move on. They could be angry, but they understood pain. Hou Yi, on the other hand, were even more dangerous. They belonged to neither the world of the living nor the afterlife. They were not born and did not die, they simply were. They couldn't be seen unless they wanted to be noticed. Mogu'e waited for a person to leave a door open for them. They didn't try to frighten a person but acted more subtly. They whispered, their voices merged with thoughts, and the person didn't even realize that something had changed. They didn't say, kill, or give commands. They only asked questions. What if you never achieve what you want? They're laughing behind your back, can't you feel it? And the person would begin to think that these questions belonged to them. Sometimes, a Gui could be seen at first. It was just a silhouette at the edge of vision, an unclear figure in a reflection, or an insignificant movement in the dark. Then they would stand closer, appearing where they couldn't be, speaking in voices a person wanted to hear. This is why people feared mirrors. By day, they were an ordinary object, but at night, one could see something in them that didn't belong to this world. It was said that mirrors should not be left uncovered at night. In the dark, they didn't just reflect, they invited. Sometimes, one could see something extra in them, for example, a movement that didn't exist in reality. It was said that if you stared into such a mirror for too long, it would begin to stare back. Superstitions were not born out of thin air. You couldn't place 4 candles in a room. The number 4, si, sounded like the word for death, si. In empty corridors, it was better not to turn around if you heard footsteps. If someone called your name at night, you shouldn't answer right away. The spirits of nature deciduous tree. Nature obeyed its own laws, but behind its order stood ancient forces that ruled the waters, rains, and winds. Their presence was felt in the sudden whirlwinds that swept across the earth, like the breath of a huge being. In Chinese tradition, the main embodiment of these forces was the dragon, the guardian of balance and the link between heaven and earth. Its image accompanied emperors from the earliest times, as its very essence symbolized wisdom and an understanding of the balance of power. Unlike predatory beasts that displayed their strength through brute force, the dragon possessed secret knowledge that allowed it to control the flow of energy. The image of this creature itself symbolized a law bestowed by the universe itself. But if one dragon could be the patron of rulers, others ruled the forces of nature. The 4 dragon kings were the guardians of the seas and rivers, the lords of rain and tides. Their will decided everything related to water because no people and no state could exist without water. The dragon king of the eastern sea commanded the oceans. His abode stood at the bottom, among coral gardens, and his retinue consisted of spirits of waves and water snakes that directed the tides. He decided the fate of ships, unleashed storms, and could guide fish into nets or leave fishing boats without a catch. The Dragon King of the Southern Sea ruled the rivers and rains. His will determined when it would rain, how full the rivers would be, which lands would have a harvest, and which would remain dry. When droughts threatened villages, priests would turn to him, performing rituals at sacred springs. Temples were built in his honor, where prayers were accompanied by offerings of jade amulets and sacrificial water. The Dragon King of the Western Sea guarded the sources of mountain rivers, from where water flowed into the valleys. His palace was located among icy lakes, and his breath turned into silence. If he wished, he would reveal secret knowledge hidden in the depths of the snowy peaks. The Dragon King of the Northern Sea was the guardian of the depths. His waters remained cold and still, but ancient secrets were hidden within them. It was said that his halls were in a place where the sun never peaked, and in his domain, there existed forces inaccessible even to the gods. If his anger raised the waters and flooded the lands, it was a sign that something more significant than simple earthly affairs had been disturbed. The dragons did not forgive neglect. In ancient chronicles, there are records of instances when people tried to change the natural course of the waters. During the Tang dynasty, one official ordered the course of a great river to be changed to protect his lands from floods. As soon as the work began, the sky was covered with clouds, a storm broke out, and the waters poured with such force that entire villages were flooded. The people saw this as the dragon's revenge, and the emperor had to issue a decree forbidding interference with the riverbeds without special permission. But not only the waters had their guardians. Forests, mountains, and plains, everything was populated by spirits whose influence was felt in every corner of China. Some were benevolent and helped those who understood their language, others punished for carelessness. But all of them were part of a single world in which man was just one of the inhabitants. Mountains were considered the abode of the gods, and therefore their peaks belonged to immortal spirits. They were powerful but rarely interfered in the affairs of mortals. Some patronized monks and hermits, others guarded the entrance to secret worlds, and a third group tested those who dared to intrude on their territory. One of the most famous spirits was Hou, the deity of mountain streams who lived on peaks covered with eternal snow and controlled the waters that flowed down, filling the rivers. When people built temples on the slopes, they brought him offerings, leaving vessels with pure spring water. If the stream dried up or turned into a raging torrent, it was considered a sign that the spirit was displeased. But among the mountain spirits, there were also man-eaters. Encounters with them were feared, as they lived in caves among foggy gorges and deceived travelers, luring them with the sounds of mountain pipes. Legends said that they could take on human form, but their reflection in the water always remained bestial. China's rivers were always living beings. They could be generous, bringing fertility to the land, or they could destroy entire settlements. Their spirits existed as real forces with whom one had to know how to bargain. The Great Yellow River, Hou Yi, had many guardian spirits. The most revered was an old man in white robes living in the depths of the river. He could appear to people, warning of floods or, on the contrary, promising a good season for farmers. Legend said that he often tested people, offering them deals, and if a mortal showed greed or disrespect, the spirit could flood his village or make him a wanderer whom the river would never let go home again. There were also ghost rivers, in whose waters were hidden the souls of the drowned. It was believed that at night in such places, you could hear them calling travelers by name, hoping to drag them into the water to take their place. To protect themselves, people placed stone altars on the banks and lit lanterns so the spirits could not come ashore. Among all the natural spirits, trees were considered the guardians of memory. They lived longer than people, watched over generations, and some could speak to those who knew how to listen. In Chinese villages, it was considered a bad omen to cut down an ancient tree or anger its spirit. Cypresses and pines were especially revered, as they were symbols of longevity. It was believed that if you hugged the trunk of such a tree and listened, you could hear the voices of ancestors whispering advice to those who were ready to accept it. Peach trees had a special power. They grew in the gardens of the gods, and their fruits bestowed immortality. In homes, peachwood was considered a good omen, as it was believed to ward off evil spirits. On holidays, front doors were decorated with peach amulets, and if illness appeared in the house, a piece of bark was burned to cleanse the space. There were also cursed groves where birds never sang and old trees whose gnarled branches resembled arms. It was said that they belonged to spirits that were better left undisturbed. In Chinese culture, man was never the master of nature. He could live in harmony with it, honor its power, and ask for blessings. But if he forgot about balance and reverence, nature would remind him of itself with rains that didn't stop for weeks, rivers that overflowed their banks, and roads that disappeared in the fog. The one who understood these signs could live in harmony with the world around them. The one who ignored them became part of another legend told by the campfire. But if nature followed its laws, the world of people demanded order. People themselves created it, passing on traditions from generation to generation and preserving the connection between the living and the dead. This world was formed over centuries, but it was most strengthened by Confucianism, a teaching that became the foundation of Chinese civilization. Confucius lived during an era when the country was torn into warring factions and wars razed cities to the ground. He created a system of views that was not based on divine commandments. He studied the texts of previous sages, re-examined the rituals of the past, and searched for patterns in history by which states became strong and people became virtuous. He concluded that the stability of society rested on the right relationships between people, where everyone should follow their role, where the younger honors the elder, and the ruler cares for his subjects. The Chinese world was structured so that the family became the basis of everything. A person was part of a clan, a link between past and future generations. Confucius said that if there is order in the family, there will be order in the state. If a person respects their parents, cares for them, and honors their memory after death, then they will also respect the ruler and follow traditions. In every home, there was an altar for ancestors, on which tablets with the names of deceased relatives were kept. Offerings were brought to them, tea, rice, and incense. It was believed that the deceased continued to exist among their descendants, guiding them, protecting them, and observing their actions. If a family forgot its ancestors, it lost their blessing. Filial piety was no less important. The father was the head of the family, his word was law. A son had no right to argue with his father, even if he believed him to be wrong. Obedience was not considered a weakness, on the contrary, it was a sign of nobility. Even if the father was mistaken, the son had to respectfully remind him of his duty, but under no circumstances contradict him openly. This principle was carried over to the entire society. The emperor was the father of the entire country. He had to rule justly, care for the people, and be a moral example. If he violated this order, if he ruled cruelly and unjustly, then he lost the mandate of heaven, the right to rule the country given from above. Then the people had the right to rise up, and his overthrow was considered not a rebellion but a restoration of natural harmony. Every person had their own purpose. Confucius identified 5 main types of relationships that defined the structure of society. Ruler and subject, the emperor must rule wisely, and the people must respect him. Father and son, the father cares for the son, and the son honors the father. Husband and wife, the husband leads the family, and the wife submits to him, but he is obligated to protect and care for her. Older brother and younger brother, the younger listens to the older, and the older cares for the younger. Friends, the only equal relationship, based on mutual respect. If a person knew their role and performed it correctly, the world was stable and harmonious. Confucius valued education and knowledge. In Chinese culture, the most respected person was a scholar. Confucius said that a country should be ruled not by inheritance but only by one who has proven their wisdom. Therefore, a system of state exams was introduced that determined who was worthy of holding high positions. Those who wanted to become officials went through the most difficult tests. For several days, they were locked in small rooms where they had to write treatises on morality, state structure, and history. Only the best received the right to serve the state. Even in the 19th century, when in many countries power was still passed down by inheritance, in China, the main rulers were those who could prove their wisdom. Confucianism penetrated into daily life, mannerisms, and traditions. Every gesture, every word, even a facial expression had meaning. When talking to an elder, you couldn't look him directly in the eyes. This was considered disrespectful. When meeting a high-ranking person, you should perform the correct bow. Arguments should be conducted calmly, as raising your voice was considered lowly and unworthy. Confucianism created a world in which power belonged to the wise. It asserted a strict order where everyone had their place and traditions were passed on unchanged from generation to generation. But alongside this teaching, there existed another philosophy that rejected rigid frameworks, did not establish strict rules, and taught people to follow the natural flow of life. This was Taoism, a teaching in which the chaos of the universe turned into harmony. Taoism appeared as the opposite of the strict system of Confucianism. It did not aim to create a correct state and did not give strict commandments. It taught people to follow the natural flow of the world, to trust nature, not artificial laws. Taoism asserted that the universe is already in perfect harmony, and human intervention only disrupts this balance. The main principle was the concept of Wu Wei, or non-action. This did not mean inaction in the usual sense, but said that one should not forcibly change the world and fight the inevitable. You shouldn't try to control what is already moving correctly. Water, when it encounters an obstacle, simply flows around it. In the same way, a person who has comprehended the Tao should not persist where it is necessary to retreat. If Confucianism gave a person a specific role, a Taoist saw his role in the absence of a structure, in the fluidity and smooth movement of things. The emperor rules the country? Let him rule. A wise man will not interfere in this but will find a way to live so that power does not affect his life. An official dictates the rules? Let him dictate them. True freedom is not in the laws but in not depending on them. Taoists went into the mountains, avoided palaces, and did not seek power because they knew that all human achievements were an illusion. Empires crumble, laws change, but the stars continue to move across the sky, and the rivers continue to flow to the sea, without asking who rules the world today. Unlike Confucian philosophers, a Taoist sage would not try to explain the world with his words because any explanation is already a distortion. One of the main texts of Taoism, the Tao Te Ching, attributed to Lao Tzu, begins with the phrase, "The Tao that can be expressed is not the true Tao." Taoism not only denied the need for strict laws but also offered a path that led beyond the very limits of human life. If Confucianism taught how to be a good person, Taoism asked, what if you can transcend human nature? Taoists believed that the path of the Tao was not only a search for harmony but also a path to immortality. They believed that if a person learned to live in accordance with natural laws and cleansed the body and mind of harmful influences, if they mastered the secret knowledge of breathing, energy, and balance, they could prolong their life or even achieve immortality. In search of this state, they developed alchemical methods, created longevity potions, and searched for the elixir of immortality. They studied herbs and minerals, meditated, and believed that the correct management of energy could transform the body and spirit. Some Taoists disappeared from the world, and legends were made about them. It was said that they learned to turn into clouds, go into another reality, and dissolve into nature. Old chronicles contain records of people who went into the mountains and never returned, and of wanderers who were seen for decades but who did not age. They were called immortals, beings who had comprehended the true nature of existence. Taoism permeated daily life, forming Chinese medicine, martial arts, and also the art of energy management, Qigong and Taijiquan. It taught people to live in harmony with the body, nature, and themselves. It said that health is a balance of energies, and illness is a sign of a violation of the flow of forces, and that correct movement and breathing can restore a person's lost integrity. Martial arts masters adopted the principles of softness and fluidity from the Taoists, the ability to yield in a fight to win later. Unlike brute force, the philosophy of Taoism suggested using the opponent's movement against them, avoiding clashes, and not going head-on where there was another path. If a Confucian was strict and faithful to the rules, a Taoist was a wise wanderer. He laughed at human anxieties, floated down the river of life without trying to change the current. He knew that everything was temporary, that everything passes, and it was for this reason that he was free. It was said that Taoist sages could turn into wind, walk on clouds, and disappear beyond the boundaries of reality. But even if these were just legends, their philosophy truly gave a person inner freedom. They were not afraid of change, did not cling to the earthly, and did not submit to other people's laws. They were interested not in the structure of society but in the mysteries of life itself and ways to prolong it or even go beyond the limits of human existence. They believed that by understanding the Tao, one could become immortal. But what if immortality was not a goal but just another illusion? What if a person had already lived many lives and would live many more until they were freed from the endless cycle of rebirth? A new teaching came to Chinese philosophy, Buddhism, and it brought with it a completely different picture of the world. Unlike Confucianism, which established a strict order on earth, and Taoism, which taught to dissolve in the flow of the universe, Buddhism looked deeper. Buddhism spoke about the very meaning of existence, about suffering, the causes of human misfortunes, and the path to liberation. It not only offered a philosophy but also gave hope. If a person lives in suffering and their world is full of pain and injustice, then it is not by chance but the result of their past actions. According to Buddhism, karma is the law of cause and effect, an invisible force connecting the past, present, and future. Everything a person does leaves a trace and creates causes that will manifest in future lives. If they act well, their next life will be prosperous. If they do evil, suffering awaits them. No prayers or offerings to spirits can change this law, only the person themselves is responsible for their fate. Buddhism brought the idea of samsara into Chinese culture, the endless cycle of births and deaths. A person dies, but their soul does not disappear, it reappears in a new body, again and again, until they reach nirvana, or in other words, complete liberation and enlightenment. But not everyone could immediately reach this state. More often than not, people were attached to the world by their desires. These passions pushed them to make mistakes, influenced their karma, and brought them back into the world of suffering. Even after death, a trial of the afterlife judgment awaited them. In Chinese Buddhism, the ideas of the afterlife were intertwined with traditional beliefs about the underworld. The 10 judges considered the deeds of the deceased, weighing their good and evil deeds. If a person led a righteous life, they could be reborn in more favorable conditions. If their soul was burdened with bad karma, they could be sent to one of the hells of the underworld, where they had to atone for their actions. But punishment was only temporary, and when the sins were atoned for, the soul would return to the world, receiving a new chance. Buddhism not only explained suffering but also gave examples of those who were able to overcome this world. In the teaching, there were Buddhas, individuals who had reached nirvana and freed themselves from rebirth. Buddha is not a name but a state, the highest stage of a being's development. The most famous was Siddhartha Gautama, a man who gave up power and wealth to understand the nature of suffering and find the path to liberation. Along with Buddhism, the veneration of bodhisattvas came into Chinese culture, beings who had reached enlightenment but refused to go into nirvana to help others. The most revered was Guanyin, who helps those who seek salvation. Her gentle and compassionate image became one of the most beloved in Chinese religious tradition. Buddhism did not reject other beliefs but was intertwined with them, forming a unique form of Chinese religiosity. It gave people hope that suffering was not a sentence but a trial that could be overcome. It taught that the world as we know it is just a temporary illusion, that everything changes, and no one is tied to one existence. If Confucianism said that a person should take their place in the world and Taoism taught to go with the flow, Buddhism offered to go beyond the limits of existence itself, to be freed from the cycle of rebirth and reach a state in which there is no pain, no suffering, and no time itself. We have already seen how the world of Chinese beliefs was formed. We talked about the gods and the strict hierarchy of the celestial palace. We have explored the philosophical teachings that define not only religious beliefs but also life itself. Chinese mythology is full of legends about people who changed the world, tamed the elements, and challenged the gods. Their deeds determined what China became and what its descendants saw. In ancient times, when the world was not yet settled by people, when rivers flowed wherever they wanted and mountains arose on their own, China suffered from a great flood. Water overflowed its banks, drowning villages, washing away fields, and sweeping away roads. The entire country turned into a huge sea, and no one could tame the elements. People died of hunger, animals abandoned their lands, and the rain poured as if the gates of heaven had opened forever. The first to try to cope with this disaster was Gun, the father of Yu. He built dams and created barriers, but the water was stronger. It broke down the walls, found weak spots, and destroyed everything people built. For 10 years, Gun fought the river and was unable to defeat it. Then the emperor ordered him to be executed and entrusted the taming of the flood to his son, Yu. Yu did not repeat his father's mistakes. He understood that you could not contain water, you had to direct it. Instead of building barriers, he began to dig canals and lay new channels for the rivers, creating a natural system for water diversion. He traveled all over China, studying the land and observing the rivers. He sought a way to subdue them not with force but with intelligence. Legends say that he toiled for 13 years without rest, digging the earth himself and laying new riverbeds. Even when he passed by his own home and heard his wife's voice, he did not go inside. If he had stopped for a moment, the flood could have swallowed the country. In the end, his efforts bore fruit. The rivers no longer overflowed, the water began to follow a new path, and China gained a new life. In gratitude for his feat, the people elected him emperor, and he founded the first great Chinese dynasty. The story of Yu became a symbol of human perseverance, knowledge, and harmony with nature. He defeated the elements with his mind, proving that nature can not only be tamed but also be made an ally. The archer and the moon goddess bow and arrow. Another legend tells us about the 10 sons. They were the children of the great celestial lord and appeared in the sky one by one to warm the earth. But one day, tired of boredom, all 10 suns rose at the same time. Their light and heat became unbearable. Rivers dried up, crops withered, and people and animals died from the heat. The world began to disappear in a flame. The great celestial lord could not stop his sons, and so he summoned the greatest archer, Hou Yi. He gave him a magical bow and 10 arrows, ordering him to rid the world of danger. Hou Yi took aim and began to shoot down the suns one by one. 9 of them fell from the heavens, and only one remained so that the world would not be plunged into darkness. The people celebrated his victory, but the celestial gods were furious. Hou Yi, the savior of humanity, became a cursed hero. He lost divine favor, and his fate no longer belonged to the heavens. Realizing that he was doomed to old age and death, he went in search of the elixir of immortality. He traveled for a long time until he found Shiwangmu, the Queen Mother of the West. She gave him a potion that could elevate him to heaven, but he did not drink it right away. He wanted to share it with his wife, China. One day, when he was not at home, China saw the elixir and, remembering that her husband was doomed to death, took it herself. The legend says that she ascended to heaven but not to the throne of the gods. Instead, she became a resident of the moon, eternally lonely and forever separated from the earth. Hou Yi lost everything. He saved the world but could not save himself. His name became a legend, but he remained a mortal outcast among people, a warning that even a hero can fall victim to their decisions. The next myth tells us about the 8 sages. They wandered through the world, living outside its rules, drinking wine with the gods, ascending to heaven, and returning whenever they wanted. They were called the Eight Immortals, 8 Taoist sages who had comprehended the secret of eternal life. Each of them achieved immortality in their own way. They did not care about the laws of men. They knew that the world was a game and learned to play it better than anyone else. Lu Dongbin was a warrior, a skilled swordsman, and a man who was predicted to have a brilliant career at court. He dreamed of fame and great battles. But one day, he fell asleep in a tavern and had a dream. In this dream, he lived a whole life. He became an official, gained wealth, and started a family. Years passed, and then he was betrayed, his career collapsed, his property was taken away, and he lost everything. He grew old in solitude and died, wanted by no one. Waking up, he realized that it was all just an illusion. Worldly success is a mirage that will sooner or later disappear. Then he left his old life, went on a journey, and met an immortal mentor who showed him the way. This is how Lu Dongbin found immortality, not in fame but in the renunciation of it. Li Taiguai was once a great sage whose body was strong and whose face was beautiful. One day, he sent his soul on an astral journey, leaving his body for several days. But when he returned, his body had already burned down, and he found himself trapped between worlds. Then he entered the first body he came across, the body of a crippled old beggar with an iron crutch. People laughed at him, looking at his ugly appearance, but he only laughed back. After all, he was no longer a human, he had crossed the boundary between mortals and immortals, and earthly trifles no longer bothered him. He could turn stones into gold but only gave them to the poor. He could work miracles but preferred to joke about the greedy and foolish. He walked the earth like a tramp, but behind his back walked eternity itself. Han Xianzi was born into a noble family, but worldly scholarship did not interest him. He saw the secrets of the world in music. He roamed the fields and mountains, listening to how the wind played with the leaves, how water sang in streams, and how snow fell to the ground without making a sound. It was said that he played the flute so well that flowers bloomed in winter, and birds landed on his shoulder, enchanted by the melody. He understood the language of nature and one day disappeared, dissolving into the music and becoming a part of it. Zhang Gulao was a Taoist master known for riding his white donkey backward. When asked why he did this, he laughed and replied, "You think time moves forward, but it moves backward. You think you know the way, you are just following someone else's tracks." His donkey could disappear into the air and reappear at his will. Zhang Gulao could predict the future but never spoke it directly, only leaving riddles. He knew that all truths were relative and that reality was an illusion, and that the best way to know the world was to look at it differently from everyone else. He Xiangu began her journey as a teenager when a Taoist teacher gave her a magical peach of immortality. After that, her body became as light as a cloud, and she could live without needing food. She wandered through the mountains and one day simply ascended to heaven, dissolving into the sunrise. Lan Saihao was the strangest of the immortals. He wore ragged clothes, walked barefoot, sang in the streets, and often pretended to be insane. He walked among people but did not belong to them. If he was given money, he could immediately throw it into a river or give it to the poor. He could laugh while looking at the rich, knowing that their gold was just dust. He never explained his actions. But one day, in front of everyone, he sang a new song and ascended to heaven, disappearing into the clouds. Chao Guojiu was an aristocrat, the brother of an empress, who had everything. But one day, he saw how dirty court life was, how much betrayal, greed, and hatred were in it. He left the palace, put on simple clothes, and became a wanderer. He sought the truth until he met the other immortals, who showed him that wealth was an illusion and that true power was in freedom from the earthly. Before this, we talked about myths that shaped the perception of the world and explained how the universe was structured. But now we move on to a different story. It is not an ancient myth or a legend with roots in the mists of time. This is a great literary epic of China, based on Buddhist and Taoist ideas about the world, but created by the pen of a writer. The book is called Journey to the West. It was created in the 16th century by the writer Wu Qing'an. The book tells about the pilgrimage of the Buddhist monk Xuanzang to India for the sacred sutras. But as is often the case, the main character in the story is not the one who walks the path but the one who creates chaos, and that hero here was Sun Wukong, the Monkey King. A being who repeatedly broke all the rules. Journey to the West is a literary novel, but the image of the Monkey King absorbed ancient Chinese ideas about the nature of a rebel, the search for immortality, the struggle with the gods, and punishment for pride. This is the story of a hero who received power but did not know what to do with it. He challenged the cosmos. He appeared from a stone imbued with the energy of heaven and earth, absorbing the essence and magic of the world. As soon as he appeared, he realized that he was not like everyone else. He had strength, cunning, a thirst for knowledge, and an incredible desire not to submit to anyone. He went on a journey, studied the art of combat, and sought knowledge until he found a Taoist teacher who revealed the secret of immortality to him and gave him 72 transformations. He could change his appearance, becoming anyone, an animal, a spirit, and even an inanimate object. But one immortality was not enough for him. He descended into the underwater kingdom of the Dragon King and took his main treasure, the golden clasped staff, which could change its size from a needle to a huge pillar capable of holding up the sky. This staff once supported the world's ocean, but now it became a weapon in the hands of the monkey. Now he had immortality, knew Taoist magic, could transform into any creature, and possessed the most powerful weapon in the world. His first thought was not how to maintain balance but how to prove that he was superior to the gods. When he realized that no one could compare with him in strength, he decided that he should rule the heavens. He appeared at the palace of the Jade Emperor, the main god of the Chinese pantheon, and demanded that his authority be recognized. The gods, wanting to avoid war, decided not to engage him in battle but to cunningly lure him to the heavens. The emperor offered him the title of imperial stable master, the one who takes care of the celestial horses. Sun Wukong considered this an insult, smashed the stable, burst into the celestial halls, and declared himself the great sage equal to heaven, a being who should not be given titles because he himself is above all titles. Then a war began. Celestial generals, the army of the gods, and legendary creatures, no one could cope with Sun Wukong. He defeated everyone, laughed at lightning strikes, repelled spears, and struck down the celestial hordes with his staff. He could not be killed or restrained. Then the celestial emperor summoned the Buddha, the only being who could stop him. Buddha did not use weapons and did not call for the help of armies. He simply held out his hand and said, "You are great, but if you are so strong, try to get out of the palm of my hand." Sun Wukong, confident that this was another trick, crossed the heavens with a single leap. He flew through the clouds, past the stars and the outer limits of the universe, until he reached 5 huge columns. He thought this was the boundary of the world, left a sign of his presence, and returned, satisfied. But when he landed, he saw that all this time, he had been on the palm of the Buddha. The 5 columns were just his fingers. At that very moment, Buddha closed his palm and then turned it into a huge stone mountain with 5 peaks, under which the monkey was sealed for 500 years. His rebellion was suppressed, and his power was powerless before wisdom. But the story does not end there, because one day, when Buddha needed a protector for the monk Xuanzang, who was to travel to India for the sacred sutras, the monkey was freed. But now he was no longer the same as before. He had to learn humility, patience, and the realization that power is not just the ability to destroy but also the duty to protect. Thus began his journey to the West, a path of redemption that was to turn a rebel into a true hero. The story of the Monkey King is the story of a chaos maker who challenges everything that exists, a story of one who did not recognize boundaries and was not afraid of the gods. But it is also a story of how even the greatest power means nothing without an understanding of one's own purpose. We have come a long way through the myths and legends of ancient China. These are not just stories about the past. They are a reflection of the Chinese view of the world and the search for harmony. They continue to live in culture, books, and cinema. Thank you for being with me on this journey. I hope you found it interesting. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments, and see you next time.